to thank our sponsors for today, EBI Consulting, Interstate Electrical Services, and Hinckley Allen. Thank you for being our sponsors. We're just going to, there we go. And this is, I want to welcome you all to the New England Real Estate Journal Construction Trends. This is for 2020. Hopefully 2021 will be even a bigger and better year for everyone with less complications than we've had this year. Sponsors again, EBI Consulting, Interstate Electrical Services, and Hinckley Allen. And there you see our speakers, Moderator Joe Kelly, Louisa Mills, Ron Ciotti, and Steve Kelly. They'll all be speaking on the upcoming panel. And that is me, Rick Kaplan. I'm with the New England Real Estate Journal. I produce these webinars. I produce the one-on-one interviews, and now we're producing our roundtable discussions to a national audience, where it will be also in a webinar form, but it will be more or less for one specific company that will have a little roundtable with maybe some of their clients or even people that just are within their company and talk about what they do for the industry. And that's the New England Real Estate Journal. It says over 55 years. It's close to 60 years now, and we reach over 53,000 now. We reach more like almost 60,000. We do have a digital presence as well as a weekly hard copy that will go out. And anyone that is interested in subscribing to the New England Real Estate Journal, you can contact me at rkaplan@nerej.com. I also want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded and will be up on the New England Real Estate Journal website at nerej.com/videos. It also will be on our YouTube channel, which is, if you go to YouTube, it's NEREJ, and you can find all of our videos that will be on there at that time. And we have our upcoming webinar, and there you go. And this is our first to a national audience. This is our first event, roundtable discussion with Freedom Venture Investments on November 10th. And we have two people that from Roundtable, from Freedom Venture Investments. Dave Seymour, a lot of you might recognize him he's the star of Flipping Boston A&E series. And we also have a former shark from the Shark Tank, Kevin Harrington, will also be speaking. That should be a very interesting show. They're both very well, well, I shouldn't say well-spoken, they're very outspoken. They tell it like it is, and they also will tell you all about what a private equity fund is all about, and compare it with REITs and different things of that nature. There's also a Q&A as well for that. So anyone interested can register at the link that you see on, well, you can't see it. So if you email me, or if you're registered for this event, you'll be getting that in an email with all the information on that as well. But look forward to it on November 10th. And now we're going to go to our panel. And oh, there we all are. And I want to introduce the moderator again, which is Joe Kelly, and he's with Mass Construction Consultants. And I'm going to hand it over to Joe right now. Take it away, Joe.
Great. Thanks, Rick. Good morning, everyone. And again, I think even the panelists, it would be helpful if we mute when we're not speaking, because we're even hearing a little feedback right now. But I wanted to just do a quick intro. We're not going to do full bios, but briefly, we have Louisa Mills, Vice President of Human Resources at Interstate Electrical. We have Ron Ciotti, partner at Hinckley Allen. And we have Steve Kelly, CEO of Timberline Construction. And another thing I wasn't aware of is Timberline Communications. So already started to learn something new before the panel's even going. So that's great. And I think it's incumbent upon us to kind of start with the elephant in the room, which is COVID. I have a, dislike for just overdosing on COVID, but I think, we'd be remiss if we didn't address it. So with that in mind, and not wanting to dwell on the negative, what is something that the panelists, and in particular, we'll start with Ron, what have you learned that you think you'll be able to use moving forward? What's kind of a positive that you learned from this process? We got to unmute yourself, Ron.
There we go. How's that? Is that a little better? Sorry about that. I think everybody is beginning to understand, basically trying to define basically more efficiencies and economies within their company as they move forward, and specifically in construction. That's so key. And one of the things that we've continued to look at in the construction industry is how not only can we comply with the COVID-related protocols, which have been so difficult to try to decipher and follow as they sort of ever change, and I have a feeling they'll continue to change throughout this winter and next spring. But the fact of the matter is, we try to find ways to do things a little bit more efficiently and economically. And I think some of those things are going to stay. And one of those things that really is probably the most significant, one that I know we're going to talk about at length today, is prefabrication in modular building, and how that is really changing the industry, both from an efficiency standpoint, and is certainly the most significant construction trend, but also even from a COVID-related standpoint, the fact that it makes it so much, anytime you have a controlled environment versus a chaotic environment like a construction site, you're able to comply with protocols that are in a much more efficient and accurate, proper manner. So the fact of the matter is, prefabrication and construction, which is really performing components of the project off-site, most of the time in a facility that is a controlled environment, more along the lines of what we would look at as sort of a processed job versus the sort of chaotic look that a construction site has. Even though there is organization to it, I think from an outsider, it's a very chaotic view. But the fact of the matter is, once you get into more of the Toyota-like process that can be done in a facility, it's a more controlled aspect. And so one of the things that we're hoping to do by moving that work off-site and into these facilities is to be able to provide a much greater efficiency. And we're seeing that in prefabrication. It's been around forever. It started actually in the mid-1800s. In the 1920s to 1930s, Sears actually sold 750,000 units, modular homes. And then it came back in the 1970s in the commercial industry, but it phased out because we didn't have the technology to keep up with prefabrication. Now we do, and now it's one of the most prevalent areas of construction. And so one of the things that we look at is how that we can use that. And one of the issues that we had was the problem that with prefabrication, it's a hybrid, and it's a process that includes both manufacturing and subcontracting services. So you have the manufacturing of goods and the subcontracting of services, which means you have both the UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code, and common law mixed into one. And so contracting for this was a mess. And just recently, actually October 5th, Consensus Docs, I'm the chair of the Agency of America's Contract Documents Forum, and they produce a family of construction contract documents like AIA, but called Consensus Docs. And those Consensus Docs actually came out with the first in the nation general contractor prefabricator contract that allows for this mixture of the UCC and common law because of this hybrid process, which is prefabrication and modular building. So it's a really interesting process.
Hey, Ron,
Yes.
forgive me. And maybe Steve and Louisa could help. Okay, whatever you did, was anybody else hearing a ringing when Ron was speaking?
Yeah, I could hear that on my end.
Yeah, Ron, it was whatever you just did was really helpful. And the only reason I'm bringing it up is it wasn't mild. It was enough to really kind of take away from what you were saying. I'm not sure if there's an adjustment you can make. And I think what you were just about to mention with consensus docs, creating a new document for prefabrication, I think people listening would really want to hear that. So I just don't want to take away from it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that very much, Joe. My problem is I don't know how to alleviate that. It's the same process. I just have just like probably everybody, I have a speaker within my camera, and I don't know what's happening or why it's doing that. Are you still hearing it?
Yeah, and maybe Rick, if you could send a message to Ron, maybe he could, when we go on to the next panelist, maybe he could call in via phone and use the phone connection and then mute his audio. If it was mild, Ron, I wouldn't persist on it, but I think I want people to hear what you have to say.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Joe.
Ron, it could be wireless interference. If you have any wireless devices, an iPad or phone or something next to the computer, sometimes there's RF interference. Just throwing it out there.
I'm not sure what's causing it. I don't have any of those devices nearby. So
Okay.
let me try to call back in and do it that way. I'll mute
Sure.
myself for a while and we can move on.
Okay, we'll move on to Steve, and then we'll go ahead and I'll bounce back to Ron in the end to finish up about consensus docs and a little bit about force majeure as well, because I know that's something people want to hear. Okay. Steve?
Sure. So while Ron's working on that, and I actually want to hear Ron's what he's going to teach us about the force majeure clause for all the construction managers who are on the call. That's something that was never really as important as it is today, and for the subcontractors for that matter who are on the call, because we've never really experienced this, at least in my lifetime. So that clause in the contracts that we often gloss over is something that's going to be really important going forward. You have the proper protection, and I know a lot of clients are already trying to push down on us that they don't want to pay for any lost time during any type of pandemic. So that's going to be a clause you definitely want to focus on in your contracts, and I'm looking forward to hear what Ron has to say. You know, from a COVID standpoint, as it applies to just how we're working in construction, you know, really the social distancing is probably the biggest challenge. You know, that we implemented hand wash stations at a much higher level than we ever have in the past. I think that's something that you'll see stick throughout. You know, it's just a good practice anyway. So apply that to the best practices is something that might be used going forward. But the social distancing requirements currently probably the biggest challenges. You know, we're doing Puma's new headquarters, which is about a $27 million job, and you're gonna get 150, you know, men and women to the upper floors of a high rise. And, you know, one of the biggest challenges for us is you're limited to getting 3 people on an elevator at a time instead of say 10. So it's learning how to work in and around, you know, some of those challenges. But I think, you know, the biggest thing going forward is learning how to work more efficiently. We're going to talk a little bit about, you know, the prefab modularization and also the technologies that help benefit that by reducing your labor on site, which then plays into, you know, making it more amenable in terms of, you know, trying to absorb the social distance requirements. You know, but for those who aren't on job sites, instead of having 100, you know, tradespeople on top of each other sequencing the work, you really have to kind of bifurcate the trade work a lot, and it makes it very challenging, you know. So I don't know how much I want to jump into the future stuff, Joe. I'll wait till we get to the, you know, the whole prefab technology application side. But from a pure COVID standpoint, you know, some of the biggest challenges to me are then the social distance requirements on the jobs. But I think you'll see some of the best practices on the hygiene and the cleaning definitely, you know, become more of a permanent application on job sites.
Why don't we try giving Ron a shot here? So Ron, if you unmute yourself and see how that goes, and that might give us a little time. We can bounce to Louisa if we're still having problems. You're still muted, Ron. You're still muted.
Yeah, if I unmute myself here, I'm only going through the video, I think, right? Or am I going through my phone?
We hear you well, so this is great. A big
Okay,
improvement.
good. All right, great. Sorry about all the technological issues. Yeah, one of the things that that COVID unfortunately taught us was all about a new clause within your contract that you probably had never looked at before, which was called force majeure. And most people probably didn't understand exactly how it worked. And there's significant issues that continue on and arguments that continue on relating to whether or not and how that applies in various situations. Force majeure clauses to cover things that basically are acts of God, for lack of a better term. And one of the things that is so important about it is how a court looks at it. Force majeure basically allows you to suspend or allows for delays caused by an act of God. It allows for damages that are caused by acts of God as you carry out your contract, depending exactly on the wording. And that wording is crucial because one of the things that you have to look at in a force majeure is how had courts up to this point interpreted a force majeure clause. And a force majeure clause was interpreted very, very strictly. In other words, if it didn't say that earthquakes were included as an act of God, earthquakes weren't included. And in many, many contracts, in fact, most contracts, it doesn't mention the word pandemic. However, one of the things that we recognize is that courts are going to give more leeway and have given more leeway in their interpretations of these clauses. But the fact of the matter is how we write them in the future is very key, and more attention has been given to them. This is the biggest thing, though. The one thing you have to understand is force majeure clauses do not apply to known circumstances. So if you are about to enter into a new contract now, if you are contracting right now for a new project, and you think you've got it all handled because you put a force majeure clause in that specifically states pandemics, and you think now that if there is an order that comes down that shuts down your project because of the pandemic, you're now covered for the delays that may occur. You're not. Because of the fact that the pandemic is an ongoing problem that you know about now, you can't cover it by a force majeure clause. This is one of the most important aspects of all of this. Really, really needs to be understood. What we have been doing for our clients is we've been putting on what's called a COVID-19 rider. And I actually drafted one for the AGC of America that the AGC of America now utilizes as well. But the fact, what that is it specifically incorporates what a COVID-19, what delays may occur based on COVID-19 and reaches some agreements on the allocation of those risks and damages between the parties. It gives the parties to that contract, that construction contract, the opportunity to negotiate what delays, how those delays will be handled, et cetera, relating to COVID-19 specifically. If you just try to address it through a force majeure clause, you're going to be very disappointed because, again, force majeure covered those projects to a certain extent, those projects that were ongoing when this first hit. And in fact, I will tell you, Joe, that I was inundated. Our firm I know did probably over 1,000 delay letters based on force majeure for our clients around both New England and the country. And we were very successful for our clients relating to those force majeure clauses initially. But for projects ongoing, or for projects that are coming up or about to be entered into, that's where we get nervous that clients and owners, contractors are going to misunderstand and try to utilize the force majeure clause on a new project, and it's not going to help them. they really do need a COVID-19 rider or provision within the contract where the parties get to negotiate how the risks and allocation, risk will be allocated as we go on.
That's fantastic, Ron. That's critical information everybody needs to hear.
Yeah.
Now, how about Louisa? As far as it took us a while to get here with all our technical difficulties, but how about yourself and Interstate? What have you kind of learned that you think you're going to continue to use forward?
Oh, perseverance, probably. That's the strongest word that keeps coming to mind. I think a lot of things Ron mentioned, and of course Steve as well, we won't kind of harp on that or be redundant with it. But I think for us, we did a lot of soul searching as the regulations and all these changes kept coming about, especially early on in March, through, quite honestly, right up through June until the reopenings kept happening. We felt like daily almost, or weekly, we were constantly rewriting our business plan. So we were trying to focus on ways to, how do we control what we know? And that was the biggest thing, was of course simplifying it and controlling what we could do to help protect our team. So while all this noise, I'll call it noise, was happening around us, we figured we still needed to do something with this workforce that we have, and we have a significant group of over 600 employees. So one of the things we did was we focused on keeping them engaged, and we did that in a variety of different ways. And one was through training. Again, not anything new, not a groundbreaking, innovative idea. But what we did was, our normal training consists of course, the apprenticeship program, licensing, and your basic requirements as it pertains to safety. But what we did was we took it to another step. And while we were waiting for job sites to open and things to happen, we started really kind of opening that window. And for example, right now, arguably in the New England market, we have the largest group of certified installers to install electrical car charging stations. We trained over 300 people in that. We certified people in building green, construction management, project management, renewable energy, and everyone from apprentices up through our tenured project superintendents, for example, had an opportunity to get trained on things that we might not have done, or to the level or magnitude that we did. And so it was things that we felt would benefit them, keep them engaged, and also down the line have a natural effect, not just on their career growth, but on the overall growth of the Interstate team. We also started focusing on, what do we do to help our clients during these times? There's got to be something we can do to help. So we started training on and identifying things such as bacteria fighting light fixtures. How do we get companies ready or institutions ready to open back up during these reopening plans? So we put a really big emphasis on making sure our team was equipped for that next step, whether it was the next step of once the reopening phase started, or the next step on helping to service our clients. The other thing and so that's not going to change. Our training syllabus is completely different now than what it was prior. We have a really good blueprint of anything from, again, just basic team building all the way through to these magnificent fixtures that, again, naturally kill bacteria. We also changed our communication style. Again, nothing innovative, right? Everybody communicates, I hope, on the day-to-day. What we did was, again, we operate in 6 New England states. And as this was coming down, every state had a different timeline of when they were reopening and what was happening in those states. Some were experiencing the COVID pandemic a lot harder than others. And it was just a lot of information for our teams, especially those that may work across borders, live in one state and work in another. So what we did was we took the information, and daily, every day at the same time, we were communicating to our team what those changes were, the specific ones, and how they impacted them and our organization for the next step. So every day we wanted them to know, here's the information that came out today, and here's how it impacts you as being part of the Interstate family. And we found that very helpful, where, again, social media can be your best friend, but it can also be, devastating and destructive, especially if there's so many what ifs and unknowns. So we've changed our model now of communication to not just incorporate the need to know stuff, but also kind of make it a little bit larger and incorporate what's happening in our world and how we feel that that impacts the interstate team. And then lastly, with COVID, like with anything, this hybrid working remote model, that was such a, it's not anything new for certain companies, especially in the tech world, but for us, we knew it was coming. Did we want to jump into it with both feet? Absolutely not. I think, why would we? That's not necessarily what we do as an organization. But what we did find was we have the technological structure, infrastructure to make it happen. And where we were missing something, we obviously jumped right in to make sure that it wasn't going to impact the company or the clients. And we came out on top, identifying that regardless if you're sitting in an office or in a job site trailer or at your home office or dining room table, we were able to still make this work. So that hybrid model, or an semblance thereof, is definitely here to stay. We don't foresee that changing. And what this pandemic did was it just jump-started that, I would imagine, not just for us, but other companies as well.
Louisa, if you don't mind me asking,
Sure.
it's funny because part of the whole podcast thing is I end up having a lot of dialogue with a number of different companies. And I was hearing from employees, it seemed like the companies that were communicating well got a very positive response from their employees. And the inverse was really true, where there were actually people, even on field labor force, that was reaching out to people at other companies when they heard how their CEOs were communicating with them during the pandemic. Did you get any feedback internally about what people thought, and do they want more of it? Or what was the thoughts on their feelings about the communication?
It actually started kind of innocently, and it was because we were fielding a lot of questions. And so we thought, okay, if these questions are coming in, there must be other people that need the answer to these questions. So it kind of happened accidentally, to be quite honest. And the feedback was overwhelming, where people were, how often can we get this communication? Or if there was, they were so used to, here's an example, I would send it out every night around 6 p.m. And there was one night it was 8 o'clock, and I forget why, I'm sure that all heck was breaking loose. And I got overwhelmed with all these texts and phone calls, like, are you sending something out? What's happening? And it was, so it was a very good, humbling experience for us as a company to realize the need for that kind of information on a regular, consistent basis. And so it was so well received. We still do it. We actually threw out a survey to identify, should we continue doing this daily? Are you sick of hearing from us? Is it too much? So we scaled it, and the response was to do it daily, but we found that at that point, especially with the reopenings, that it was starting to become a little redundant. So we scaled it back to every other day, and we're still in that mode right now. And I sent one out last night because it goes out on Tuesdays, for example, and we get great response back. And then sometimes it also triggers other questions, where it could be something like the new CDC explanation about the distancing of the 15-minute and the 6-foot analysis. So we put that out there, and we let people know, here's our interpretation of this, and this is what we might have to do to change our COVID plan. And so it keeps everyone informed at the same time. It also allows them all the following morning to talk about it together, whether they're on a job site or on a remote, I guess not remote, but on a virtual meeting, or in the hybrid office mode.
Great. All right. Now
Joe, I can chime in on that too.
Yeah, please.
Some of what Louise was talking about, we went through all those same kind of lessons learned, growing pains, figuring out, trial by fire. We started out with we also work in multiple states throughout New England. So in that case, there were different rules and regs, and even with Mass, Boston was doing different than Cambridge and Somerville in the States. So there's a whole lot of conflict. So different jobs are deemed necessary. Others start to shut down over time. So we started doing things virtually, which again, we hadn't done anywhere to this extent in the past. And we started doing virtual calls multiple times a week to kind of educate everybody. So we got initially huge positive feedback that, hey, this is great. You let us know what's going on. You're keeping us surprised. Some people are working, some people are not. So it's those are different stresses on different families. But then the frequency we started to hear was a little bit too often ourselves. So we said, okay, well, you scaled it back to with a virtual call where everybody was calling, and we went to just once a week. But then we realized that after probably say a month and a half into COVID, that, you know, this is all about work, and people are being stressed out dealing with pandemics. We actually on Thursdays made a happy hour. So people would call in whatever their favorite drink was, and they could have their, you know, their baby on their lap or their puppy on their lap, whatever they wanted, cat, dog, there's, you know, different people. But, you know, we made it a virtual happy hour, and inevitably that would go on for an hour and a half. People just kind of drinking from home, but talking to their coworkers, which helped kind of bridge that gap between, you know, missing your friends at work and things like that. So I think the whole virtual application is something that, if you asked me a year ago, I never could have predicted it being this successful. And then the whole, you know, the work from home balance with the whole virtual ability to do it, you know, we've learned as a company that it can be more successful than maybe we would have thought, because a lot of people were very successful from home. And I think there's a peak and a valley in that, like any other new trend, but that's a conversation for another day. But I think that as companies, we've all realized that by embracing the technology and putting some trust and flexibility into the workforce, it definitely added to our culture. And in the end, you asked, you know, did we get feedback? We got hugely positive feedback. You know, Louise makes a great point about social media. It can be fantastic, or it can be damaging. You know, it takes one little chirp on social media can make it, you know, paint a broad brush. And we were fortunate to get a ton of positive feedback from throughout the team in terms of, you know, how we handled it, and really the embracing the technology. It was huge. We put we have a training room where we invested and put a pretty sophisticated AV package in, so that we could actually do a much better job training virtually while people were still out of the office, you know. And so I definitely think there's a huge value play in the long-term success of, I think, what we all learned how to adapt to by embracing the technology. Steve,
do you think, and not to harp on this too much, but I just think communication is so important for a company. Do you think that post-pandemic, you continue the communication? And not that it has to be at a frequency, but did you learn that, hey, you know what, maybe we didn't communicate enough prior? We kind of just, you know, plowed ahead and were so busy that we didn't stop to communicate to people? Or
I would say the how is different, right? Because in the built work environment, we're all working, you see each other every day. We're really at a point where people weren't seeing each other and dealing with the stresses of home. So we had to apply the communication that way during that time. There is a different level of communication because we're 100% back to work and have been, you know, for a little while now. But I do think that what we learned is the communication, especially a little bit of the lighthearted stuff. You know, it can't all be the indoctrination of what's going on corporately. Well, the whole happy hour thing was a good segue, because we learned that by doing a better job of communicating some of like the lighter, the positive stuff, you know, what's going on in people's personal lives. You know, someone may have just had a baby or something positive to celebrate. So I think on that level, I think the communication is we've learned that we need to do I'll say a better job or advance how we communicate on those levels. You know, but I definitely think you know, for us in construction, what's tough is we've got superintendents who are out on jobs throughout New England. So to a degree, they're men and women on islands. They're not part of the office. They just can't get here at times. So what we did realize is, rather than have them come in as often as we try to get them down here, the whole virtual bridge is going to help that dramatically going forward. You know, now rather than have a super all the way drive down from New Hampshire to attend an hour-and-a-half meeting, they can jump on virtually, but we can do certain things to make it you know, enjoyable for them, which is some things we try to do. You know, actually, you know, a complete segue from employees, but even client development. You know, obviously the whole interaction at the client level is dramatically different this year, because typically we're going into their offices, we're presenting in person, we're taking them to lunch or dinner. Something that we started to do, which I thought was pretty effective, to get a lot of positive feedback from our clients, is when we were having virtual meetings, we would send them Grubhub gift cards to every person on the call. So even though we couldn't take them to lunch or bring them lunch, we were buying them lunch for that day during the meeting, you know. So just a little something that, you know, you had to adapt to from a virtual environment. But we got a lot of positive feedback from our clients. You know, you send them a $25 gift card, and you think they just won the lottery, you know. So it was pretty comical, but definitely something was a value add that we would continue to do.
Well, I love the gift cards.
And I'll just. I'm sorry, Steve, I'm going to steal that idea, calling it like a meeting in a box. So I'll get for it. Maybe we'll name it after you.
Nice.
If I could just, if I could add one quick piece to that, I think that every company has to do soul searching all the time. because it's easy to get caught up in a routine situation. And this, for us, I think, was one of those situations that if I go back, I could tell you we communicate so much on so many other things prior to the pandemic, but it was an eye-opening situation on how some of that communication becomes very standard. So acts of this type of nature really kind of force you to do some soul searching, and then there's positive stuff that comes out of it, like that meeting in a box, which I think is great. It's a good takeaway.
Yeah, fantastic.
Team effort. Team effort.
Yes, love mixing it up. But just more importantly, to go on record, dogs are better than cats. But to go back to prefab, which we kind of started with, as we all know, it's continuing to play like a bigger and bigger role in what we do. How do you see it changing the way you do business, or even what you expect from clients or subcontractors? What do you expect for other people? So how does it affect you moving forward, how does it change your expectations of other team members? And I think probably Louise is a good place to start with this one, seeing you guys have invested pretty heavily on that front.
Sure, it's a big topic, and I think Ron, you teed it up so well. So you saved a good chunk of that for me, which I love. So that's great. And I don't think this is one of those that people need to are looking for me to explain or define what prefabrication is. It's not a new concept, and I think we can all agree that everyone understands what that is. But of course, if there's ever any questions and people are looking for more detail, want to tour our facility, more than happy to make that happen. But that being said, I think what is more important, however, is that we all understand that this model is one that continues to evolve, and it literally has become an essential. The prefabrication of today, or even of what tomorrow is, it's a vital tool that our industry, one that encompasses so many areas of what we understand is a cross-functional process that starts from inception all the way through installation, and it ties into so many things. And I think that's where prefab really stands out, regardless if you have a preconceived notion of what prefab was, which was maybe in the past, it was a folding table in the back of a dusty warehouse or garage. That is so far from where it is today. And it ties into so many things: design, build, coordination, detailing, 3D modeling, Trimble, planning, procurement, material logistics, and of course, ultimately assembly. Construction is one of those industries that experiences the most change, especially in the last decade, aside from what's been exacerbated already by the pandemic. And we will continue to see those tighter deadlines, smaller margins, ongoing skill gaps, and an expedited need for what we call succession planning, which I believe all of which Steve will talk about in a little later. But with these marketplace demands, the saving solution comes down to really the rapid advances in technology and the continuous need to add efficiencies that focus on maximizing each person's value add for what they're bringing internally to their internal customer, as well as the external customer. Prefabrication is the answer to that, whether it's our state-of-the-art facility, which we're really proud of, or a hybrid version thereof. It's an expected solution to meet these ongoing changes and challenges that we are currently not just experiencing now, but even challenges that we don't even know what the fallout is still yet in the years to come, especially in the next 2 to 3 years, based on just this pandemic alone. A good example of how to talk about where we see prefab going, or maybe because it can be a scary topic for someone who's never approached it or not sure even how to handle it. They're probably already doing certain things and just don't even realize. But many of us recall, maybe not everybody, depending on age of who's on this webinar, but a VHS tape or an 8-track cassette player. First of all, not everybody knows what that is anymore. And today you'd be really hard pressed even to find one, or to even find a device that would play one. And even if you could, why would you, right? I mean, we've evolved so much that we didn't do away with movies. We didn't do away with recording milestones or with music. What we did was we made it better. We made it more attainable. We made it more efficient and accessible. And that's true with prefabrication. more and more prefabrication is identified as that valuable resources that helps support the trades. We're not eliminating positions, we're actually adding positions and we're adding efficiencies. I can talk about the electrical. Not ever has an apprentice said, oh, I'm so excited to be sitting in class learning about how to break down packages, handle defectives, sweep the floor, run back and forth to a supply house for materials that I forgot, or run back and forth from the 50th floor down to someone's pickup truck to grab that little widget that we forgot, you know, when we first went back up to that 50th floor to begin with. They're in school today to learn how to install. They're learning safety, they're learning the code, they're learning the actual trade of installation. Somewhere along the lines, we got away from that. And now we're pulling that back in through prefabrication, through things such as targeted material delivery, reduced site footprint, packaging waste, ergonomics. It's a controlled environment. We're maximizing the true install that is happening on a job site now versus all the other noise that someone had to deal with on a job site. Our world is different, and you know, the new age is very, very powerful. People today are raised with quick access to information, technology, and really just they value their personal time a heck of a lot more than we probably grew up realizing we should, right? You worked hard, and then at the end of the weekend, you had a couple of hours to relax and hang out with your family. That's not the case anymore. So, you know, the reality is the install window is just going to continue to get tighter over the next, you know, couple of years. At some point it'll plateau, but it's not, we're not going to go back where we have this luxury of time to install, or this luxury of time where we have this an abundance of this massive margin gap. You know, our team through prefabrication can work ergonomically safe. The installation is supported through this our 100,000 square foot you know, prefab model. And we don't foresee any client advocating for us not to be efficient down the line, or to say, no, 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 go back to doing things the old way. Don't use modern technology. Bring in all of those wire reels and all of your scrap, you know, all of this stuff that is now taking away from, even just with COVID times on, you can't function anymore. So the goal really is what is the prefab of the future? It's not going anywhere. And what people need to do, even if they can't have 100,000 square feet facility, they need to start identifying that what takeaways can I do internally that will help supplement what I do in the field.
Great. Ron or Steve, thoughts?
Ron, you want to talk about the legal part of prefab? You want me to jump into that on the construction side? Where do you want to go next?
Either one works for me, Steve. Why don't I jump in at the end? Go ahead. So go ahead, and I'd rather hear you than me talk.
All right. So I'm going to take a little holistic approach. I'm going to talk about prefab, right? We're also going to talk about really the adaptation technology in the construction industry. If any of you guys seen the slides, so there's a slide I saw. So from 1960 on the X and Y axis, construction almost flatlined all the way to 2000 without any advancement in technology. And every other industry in the country has done this. So if you haven't seen that slide, it's pretty dynamic to actually think about that. That's real. It's based on true data. What you've really seen in the last 15, 20 years is a slow adaptation of technology. You know, BIM started becoming, you know, building information modeling, which I think everybody knows about. You don't need to hear me explain that to you. But BIM started, you know, being relevant around 15 years ago in the design community, but now it's made its way into the construction trades. It really saves a ton of money in clash detection. But you're going to start to see now from 2020 to 2030 adaptation of a ton of new technology. You know, the VR, AR, MR, which is you know, virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality. That's going to become huge in the next 10 years in our industry. You know, the prefab side of things, which Louisa and her company does an awesome job on, is huge in our side from a CM standpoint. One, your time in the field is risk. Risk is exposure to a liability. It's a huge safety gain when you can shorten up the amount of work that people have to do, particularly at heights on lifts in the field. So all your MEP trades, electricians, of course, but your mechanicals, your plumbing, everybody. The more prefab we can do offsite, is going to help all of the construction costs, which is another big thing on the owner's side, is where are the construction costs going. So the more you can prefab helps safety, helps all your cost controls. And we have resisted it, like Ron mentioned, the 20s, 30s, and 40s that they started to do it, but we really did get away from that whole technology from 1960 to 2000. In the bigger picture, there's a shortage of labor coming, and not coming, it's here now. A few years back, it was 2016, the average age of a carpenter in the city of Boston in the union was 48, and the average age nationally for a superintendent was 54, which shows you the lack of supply of young talent kind of coming into the industry. And really that stems from all of us growing up thinking the best path for our kids' future is college. Well, guess what? That's not the best path for every kid in the United States. They can actually build a great living by learning a trade. And we need to kind of rethink how we're pushing all of our kids into maybe an imperfect system. So we need a supply of labor to help us. And really by 2030, there's going to be a cliff where a lot of aging folks will be retiring, and there really isn't a supply. So one of the solutions to that is the technology piece. If you can prefab a lot more of that off-site and bring it on-site, you need less labor on-site to then install it because you've applied it in the field. And again, that applies to your multiple disciplines. Other technologies that are becoming more mainstream. The use of 3D printing technology, again, which helps then clash detection in terms of finding mistakes before they actually happen in the field. Exoskeletons is becoming big. The use of drones is becoming big. So all of a sudden, we'll start to see a lot of technology over the next 10 years as it gets embraced by our industry. I think we're going to see huge efficiencies, which again, that's critical because we do have some labor shortages that are continuing to grow between now and 2030.
Steve, do you actually, and this is just a selfish question, I'm kind of curious, when you look at a subcontractor in the bid phase, and if all things are relatively equal, are you looking at what percentage they want to prefab as a data point, whether you want to select that subcontractor or not? Or are you just looking at their track record of how much they prefab? I guess at the end of the day, the question is, does it weigh in your decision when it comes to who you want to hire?
So it's a good question. It's a little bit of a complex answer. Some prefab components will be relative to design, which we don't always control. But we do in our world, especially if it's in the design build or design assist world, we have a much more heavy influence. But even in a bid world, we look at that as a value add play, right? So doing your kind of, cost benefit analysis, we would look at, let's just say that Interstate is bidding and they might not be the low bidder, okay? But there's a value play because they can prefab a lot of that, and we'll look at the bigger picture. It might shorten up the schedule, cut down the number of dumps as you need on the site. And again, that's time is money to all of us, and time is risk and liability to all of us. So we do take a holistic look at every sub, okay? And again, sometimes our hands are tied from the design team and or the ownership team, but sometimes we can influence those decisions. And we would always look at some sort of prefab module component and say, all right, well, what is the cost benefit analysis? And sometimes if we think there's merit, we can sell it. And oftentimes, our owners will listen to us, particularly in the negotiated work. That's where you have a heavier influence on where jobs are going to progress. So there's absolutely a play for that. And the companies who do it well would tend to be the most sophisticated and tend to be on the most sophisticated projects. It would definitely embrace those procedures if we can.
Great. Okay, thanks.
If I could just add to that for a second, that was answered so eloquently. And we appreciate that, especially being a sub that is invested a lot into our prefabrication. And I think it's something that is humbling for us. I can talk about Interstate, where we have to also approach it as this is a tool, no different than our investment in technology and 3D and Trimble and all of the advances that we pride ourselves on having. This is another one of those that helps us get to the end result for that client. And I know we're going to talk about it, and so not to jump ahead, but just the skill gap and the shortage of labor out there, this is one of those avenues that helps us combat that as well. So it's important for all of us to always look at it holistically. That is it always going to win us a job? I think selfishly we would love to say yes, and we think it is, but we also think it's one of those many other things as well that ties into the full package from what we offer.
Great. So Ron, how do we execute this
Yeah, thank you, Joe. You know, prefabrication in modular building is this incredible, and it really is. It's this incredible advancement that this industry needed so badly. But one of the things that we tend to do in the construction industry is we tend to jump. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't jump into this. We absolutely should jump into this, but we need to do it right in the same way that you wouldn't jump into a construction process unless you could do it properly. And I think the construction industry has solved how to do it from a physical standpoint and do it very well. And I think we're making those advancements, as Louisa and Steve both touched on in a very eloquent way. But the fact of the matter is, what we hadn't done right is the legal side of it. And I think it's one of the problems we have in this country, frankly, is a lack of attorneys who actually focus their full practice on construction. I see way too often attorneys saying, "Oh yeah, I do construction." You go onto their website and construction is listed with about 20 other specialties that they have. The problem is when you don't focus on it, you don't start understanding some of the hidden risks involved. And this is one of the areas. I started representing a lot of prefabricators in modular builders, along with general contractors and subcontractors that don't do prefab. But the fact of the matter is, these prefabs and modular builders started coming to me, and they would come to me with their contracts, and their contracts would be standard subcontract agreements, which don't cover any of the potential hidden and legal risks that go along with prefabrication on the manufacturing side, or a purchase order that they had been using, which doesn't touch the subcontractor services that they're providing. It's a hybrid process that really hadn't been looked at before. And so that's one of the big issues here, is how do you take this process that is truly a manufacturer and a subcontract service and bring them into one contract and actually cover all of the hidden risks that are out there when you do both of those services, and when you provide both of when I say service, a service and a good at the same time. And so we really started tearing apart how to contract this, and I started doing it for my clients. And then, as the chair of the AGC of America's Contract Documents Forum, I went to the AGC and said, we need to do something about this, and everybody agreed. And so we came up with Consensus Doc 753, which is this document that now does bring this to light, all of the hidden risks, and we start to go through it. It's not a cure-all document, but it certainly is the first in the industry to touch upon all these hidden risks that when you melt a manufacturing process with a subcontracting service. And so it's a great place to start. You still need an attorney to look at it and make it specific to your relationship with that general contractor or prefabricator, but it is a great place to start to begin to look at how to allocate those specific risks. And I will tell you that this came out October 5th. I have probably received over 50 different calls on it already, relating to the document, how to apply it, how to work with it, whether or not it applies to their specific situation, because this is actually created. It's going to be a family of documents, prefabrication documents. This is the first, and this one applies to a prefabricator who would be both prefabricating components for the project and integrating those components into the project. If you are purely a manufacturer, all you're doing is manufacturing the components, this probably isn't the proper document for you. But if you are both manufacturing those components and integrating them into the ongoing project, then this is a really good document for you to start with. And if anybody out there thinks that this is a passing phase or anything like that, Louisa, I loved your analogy of how we listen to music, because I think that's great. It's here to stay. It's here to solve so many different issues. And I put on a webinar for the National Association of Surety Bond Producers yesterday, specifically on prefabrication. We had over 280 people from across the country tune into that. And I got immediately after the call, after the webinar, I got 4 different calls on it. So people are incredibly interested in it. They recognize, and I think we all recognize, how critical it is that the construction industry, for all of those reasons, Steve talked about the fact that we really need this from and I know Louisa talked about it as well, from a workforce issue. We need prefabrication because it's going to allow people to not only look at it and say, well, I'm trying to decide what profession I want to go into. I don't want to stand outside on some steel on a December day in Boston and get frozen. But if we can now say, no, you don't have to do that. You can work in the construction industry and work in a controlled and an environmentally controlled environment to do this offsite work. It's an incredible pull for that new workforce that we were just discussing. So there's so many reasons to go to prefabrication, and prefabrication is going to be here to stay. It's going to continue to. I know there's some of the largest GCs in the country that I've spoken with have talked about the fact that they now look at every single project when it comes into bid, whether it had prefabrication in it or not. They look at it and start to see how they can chop this up from a prefabrication standpoint. And with their bid, they pass in basically that, basically the VE to show how this can, they can shrink the schedule, how they can do this through prefabrication in a much more efficient manner for the owner. And they've won bids based on that, even though it didn't come in that way from the original design. So it really is an interesting thing. The only thing I caution everybody is to ensure that you are contracting it properly, because if you're not contracting it properly, man, you can create a mess for yourself. And I've been involved in some of those, working out some of those messes that aren't easy.
Great. Thanks, Ron.
And Ron's the guy to call.
Thanks, Steve.
So everyone has alluded to the fact that prefabrication to some degree helps with a shortage of skilled trades, shortage of labor in general. And I think in our early discussions, there was kind of an agreement that, labor shortage or skilled trade shortage is just kind of a piece of the overall puzzle when it comes to employees or people, what we'll just loosely call people, right? It's people management. So how do we address, attracting, retaining workforce, and also like putting them in a place where they can grow, give them opportunities to grow? So how do you guys look at that limited resource of people, attracting, retaining, and growing those people to meet your needs? And I think I'd like to start with Steve, because Steve, you had a pretty good sense of some of the data out there around labor and personnel.
Sure. So first, realize I'm a stats and data analytics guy, so I love stats and data, so I don't want to bore you with them, but I truly believe that we can learn a lot from stats and data. Okay. And I look at the rearview mirror as a library from which we can learn. And if you learn from that, you apply it to the windshield. And we all need to live in the windshield if we're going to build a long-term sustainable company. So I want to share some stats. I'm going to share the screen with you. All right, Joe?
Sure, go for it, please.
How's that? Can everybody see that?
Yep, excellent.
So LOS, average length of stay, very critical stat if you're running a business, because it says a lot about you, it says a lot about your employees. So if you see the baby boomers, which is the generation prior to mine, but really the generation post-World War II, you see the age 46 to 64. Okay, so the average length of stay, how long they would average at a job, 19.4 years. Okay, so understand that for 1 second. If every employee you're hiring, and these are all national stats, lasted 19.4 years, you had some pretty good employees who were pretty loyal and dedicated. You didn't have a high cost of turnover. So now we go to the Gen X's, my age group, 65 to 79. You can see that cut almost in half, drop down to 9.6 years, okay? So while it's still a cut by 50%, it's still, if you're replacing employees every 10 years, it's not an overall a huge cost to your company, okay? So you can withstand and build a long-term sustainable company. Now let's look at the next generation, millennials, 1980 to 1996, 18-month average length of stay. That is a dramatic, huge impact for any company. And if you don't learn what the problem is to minimize that exposure, you'll be out of business really fast. So the average cost to replace a millennial, all right, right now in the job force is $35,000 each nationally, and that's across all industries. I'm going to argue that in the Northeast, in the AEC, RE industry, lawyers in particular, it's a hell of a lot higher than $35,000, right? So you better figure that out fast, because if you're spending $35,000 every 19.4 years to replace an employee, it's not going to put you out of business. Same with every 9.6. If you're doing every 18 months, you're doing something wrong, and you better figure out the why behind the how to stop that from happening. But even today, it's got a $30.5 billion, I don't know if you can see that slide because it's behind the pictures of people, but on the US economy right now, the cost of replacement in the US economy is $30.5 billion. There's a B at the end of that. I can't see it, but I happen to know it. $30.5 billion is the cost of job replacement of the current millennial generation right now across all industries. So that's a pretty dramatic stat to understand. Okay, so if you understand that stat and understand all these data points that I just gave you, it should shock you at first, but then say to yourself, if we want to be a successful business, what do we have to do differently to make that happen, right? So let's go to the next slide for a second. How to build a humane team. So how do you do that? First, realize if you understand how your employees think and you build your company to then answer that, then you're starting to get in the right direction, okay? But here's another couple data points for you. By 2020, which we're in now, and these data points were as of 2016, 67% of the national labor force will be of the then millennial generation. I didn't bother putting that up there because we're almost done with 2020. The more staggering stat is by 2024, 82% of the national workforce will be the millennials and then the Gen Z who's coming up after them, okay? So understanding that within almost 3 years, 82% of the national labor force is of that generation. If you want to lead a sustainable long-term company, you better understand what goes into keeping those employees so you're not losing them every 18 months and spending $35,000 per employee every 18 months. So here are some things that actually matter, okay? One, culture. The culture of your organization is going to completely determine whether you can retain, first of all, recruit, but then retain, you know, the millennial generation. It's really important to them. They want to know what your company, what's important to you. You know, they want it to really, it always has to marry up with what they're looking for themselves or their own professional career. But you need to start to learn that. And, you know, companies, Joe, you mentioned 2 companies earlier. I'm not even going to mention who they are. But some are culture-led, some are strategy-led. There's a whole lot of stats and data out there to tell you in the modern-day economy, culture-led organizations are going to outperform strategy-led companies 10 to 1. A strategy-led company in the 1980s, they were very successful, but we're in a different world, different labor environment. So your culture is going to be really important. So next thing that's really important to them, you know, you want to invest in them. The millennials want a mentorship program, not just so they can get mentorship and learn from people above them. They actually want to mentor up. You know, so something we actually created here at Timberline was a mentorship committee to kind of learn and have the team come back to us with some feedback. In all the committees I'm about to mention to you, we purposely did not have anyone from that senior leadership team involved because I don't want the employees feeling intimidated to not speak their mind. So we let people volunteer for committees and they come back with some ideas and then would take those ideas and, you know, some short, long term, you start to implement them as you can, but at least you're giving the voice to the people, a voice to the team, and that to come back. So beyond mentorship though, training is equally important. Millennials want to have the opportunity to train. You know, Louisa mentioned how good of a job they do at Interstate. We at Timberline created a program here as well where, you know, in our industry, you're either, you know, a project manager, a superintendent, or an estimator. So we created a program where every kid who comes in out of college has to spend 8 months in each one of those verticals, and they learn a lot more. And now they have a little bit of say in their future. You know, we had one kid who thought he wanted to be a PM, but once he was actually in the field as a super, now he decided he wants to be a super. So you give them a little bit of influence on their own future direction in their career. But you also that well-rounded experience. If you had 8 months in estimating, you're still gonna be a better PM down the future. If you had 8 months in the field, you'd be a better PM. So the training is something that benefits the company, but it's something the millennials absolutely will demand. And if they don't get it, they're going to leave a company, go to a company that does give them some mentorship and some training. Again, another thing, a fun environment. They want a company where they love to work. They still work hard, and believe me, some people knock the millennial generation, oh, they're terrible, all those other things, a couple of years ago. No, you have to embrace them. There were some hardworking, really smart. Rick Kaplan was telling me about his son early, who's a millennial, really smart, hardworking kid. So, but you have to build it with it. There's some perks for them. At Timberline, we invested a lot of money. We repositioned the whole physical plan to make it really a dynamic, collaborative workspace. But we put a golf simulator in. We put a pool table in. We put, there's beers on tap. There's a whole lot of stuff that's fun. We actually did a whole outdoor patio with a big fire table where we can have some cigars and maybe a drink at night, and a big grill. So we built like an amenity-rich, campus here where the young folks are really, really loving it. But they love the golf simulator. We now run a golf league. So throughout the whole winter, we'll have everyone be golfing. We'll be bringing clients down to golf. So it's an investment in their future, which is going to help us retain all the young folks. A commitment to sustainability. Another thing that's really important to that demographic is, where are you in what's going on in the whole world, and everybody, whether it doesn't matter which side of the political fence you're on, everybody can agree that there's issues with the climate control and what's happening. Millennials want to know what you as a company are doing for it. So we reacted to that when we did our renovation. We put a green roof on, the solar play, and something little you might not think about, but one of the focal points of our lobby when we did the renovation was going to be a big fireplace, right? It's a New England theme. You want fireplace. But I looked into it, and the fireplaces burn 60 to 100,000 BTUs, 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. A, it's a lot of money, but B, it's not good for the environment. So we actually introduced a hydro vapor fireplace. So it looks like fire, but it's actually just water vapor with LED lighting. It's really cool. So again, our young kids who really care about the environment, one of who's my son, who is still in college, but he's worked here before the co-op, and they love the stuff that we're doing around here that gives back and tries to protect the environment. So that's just something that, as a company, you need to have a sustainability program to really encourage and get their participation. And the last I'll talk about is, I come from the old school mindset of, we all worked really, really hard and long hours, 6 days a week, 12, 14-hour days. The world has changed from there. So you need to have some work-life balance. You need to provide some flexibility. And it goes back to some of the things we learned out of the COVID-19 is, yes, you can have some people work from home. You can do more with virtual technology. But at the end of the day, you have to build a program where there's some flexibility to allow people to do a little bit more than what we all grew up. I shouldn't say we all. Us older folks grew up doing in the early in our career. And that's something that, again, goes back to the culture of your organization. So these are just some metrics that really are important to that millennial generation. And at the end of the day, in 2024, it's going to be 82% of the national labor force, and Gen Z, by the way. The born digital generation is what really they are. So just if you embrace this, you can help build a long-term sustainable company. If you don't understand this and you don't learn this really soon, you're not going to be around in 2030. So I'd encourage everybody to learn what it's going to take to build and retain these folks, because you'll spend a lot of money replacing them. And it's something that's really critical to long-term success of a company. I'll flip it back to you, Joe.
Great, thanks, Steve. I see Rick popping up. You
that's not a terrible thing.
okay? No, so we're at the 11:30 mark.
Yeah, we are at the 11:30 mark, but we do have a couple of questions that I'm not sure if we touched on this at all, but we have a question. How do owners factor into the decision to use prefab? Do they need to be convinced, or are they ever leading the change? Same question for designers, I guess. How do they share the risks and benefits? Is there anyone that can answer that in a quick manner?
So I'll answer that from a from our point of view, and obviously perhaps it's best answered from a GC point of view as well. But the short answer is, we view everything, every aspect of what comes into our facility can it be prefabbed regardless. So it is a tool we have, and we view it as no different. you know, as far as saying, do we use our computer today or not? Prefab is embedded in our culture, so it is all upfront. We identify, is it something that can go through prefab or our operations center, material coordination, whatever it is. So it is viewed as one of those check marks that as it's almost more of why wouldn't it be prefabbed, I guess, is the way we view it. So I don't know if that helps answer that. And with that, through prefabrication, everything's included on the engineering side because there's still coordination and detailing that has to pass through the assembly side.
Yeah, I'll answer real quick from our side, Rick. The owners have a huge influence in it because your more sophisticated owners are going to hire more sophisticated CMs, who are going to hire more sophisticated subs, who are going to, and also more sophisticated design teams on the front end. So obviously there's a broad range of owners, depends what sector you're working in. The more complex sectors, the science, the technology, the healthcare, the data centers, you'll just have much more sophisticated MEP subs. In that case, we're typically working with a different end user. So those clients would be much more receptive to it. It really, they drive the bus in a lot of cases. You know, it depends if it's a hard bid lump sum job. It's harder to then, you know, offer up solutions because you're forced in a competitive, you know, plan and spec environment. Now we work in that less than 50% of the time. So in the negotiated world, we can absolutely bring that to the table. And oftentimes we're working with the design team, would bring in interstate in early on in the process. You start to work that value management into the whole supply of the whole process, you know. So it really depends who you're working with. Owners absolutely play a critical role in that, though. They need to be willing to, you know, hire the sophisticated companies who can bring that type of value to them. And again, I think that somewhat varies by sector, but I think they and the design teams who have experience with, you know, historically, some design teams, you know, I'll say within the last 10 years would want to stick to their base design, and we're a little bit apprehensive to go modular prefab on depending which sector you're talking, which subtrade. But more and more, they're becoming more receptive to that when we present it to them. We actually have a similar process going on at Puma right now, where we're presented to the architect design team. Will they accept a modular prefab components, not electrical, but it has to do with the whole doors, glass systems, things like that. And they're thinking about it, you know, but we need their buy-in to present it to the owners as a potential value play, in which case you look at the presentation. It's a little bit higher cost premium to buy, but it can save time and money and save in other places. So there's a whole part of the process that, you know, depends on what type of people you're working with.
Great. One last question, and then we're going to have to close this out. But we have a question that came in. Have spec projects outside of apartments been put on pause?
I'd say, to my knowledge, for the most part, yes. You know, there's a couple spec buildings that were going to be built that I was aware of, and they've been put on hold. There's obviously a lot of financial uncertainty in terms of where things are progressing right now with A, the election, and B, the economy. And that has a heavy influence on any developer who's going to build a building on spec. With the exception, I'd say, of life sciences. You know, we become the life science capital of the world, really, between Boston, Cambridge, and that's going to grow throughout the greater Boston, even up into southern New Hampshire, throughout the 495 belt, with more and more CGMP facilities being built. So I think that's one sector where there's still people building on spec, but that's probably it.
Great.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Steve. I think that's exactly correct.
Okay, I think we've come to the close of this. This has been a great webinar. A lot of great information came out of it. I want to thank Joe Kelly for moderating, Steve Kelly of Timberline. Always great to see you, and always great to listen to your information, Steve. Louisa Mills from Interstate Electrical Services, all great information. Ron Ciotti from Hinckley Allen. Except for the beginning when you didn't have that headset on. Everything else was great, Ron. Now,
I appreciate it. Sorry about that.
I want to thank you all. Great. I know everyone is standing and applauding right now at home. And I want to thank our sponsors one more time, EBI Consulting, Interstate Electrical Services, and Hinckley Allen. I want to thank you all. I want to thank everyone for attending. And I hope you all have a great Wednesday and stay safe.